Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. For those of you that are new here, I'm Johnny Chivers, and in today's video we're going to take a look at AWS Glue. There's already a video of AWS Glue on the channel, however that was filmed over 3 years ago now and has been released for about 2.5 years. The AWS console has since updated, feels completely different, and in fact there's new features within the Glue service itself that aren't covered in that original video. A lot of you have requested an update to that video, so we're going to do it today. It'll follow the same format. We'll go through what is Glue, we'll take a look at the Glue data catalog, and we'll start building ETL jobs as well. Everything you need for this tutorial is located on the GitHub link in the description below. That includes the data and the slides that I'm going to use. I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe to the channel because that helps me out. With that all being said, let's jump onto the computer, take a look at what AWS Glue is, then do some setup work using the code located in that repo on GitHub. So again, download that repo, highly important. Join me on the computer and we'll get started. Okay folks, just to remind you again, I will make these slides available to download on the GitHub if you want to download them, annotate and follow along. First thing we need to cover is what is AWS Glue. So it's a fully managed ETL service. That's kind of the core value proposition, fully managed ETL service. That means that AWS are going to do the heavy lifting for you when it comes to infrastructure. It's a Spark or actually a Python ETL engine, so it has both Spark and Python. Usually you would only see Spark mentioned in the documents, or a lot of people would talk about Spark because it's big data, but you can do Python as well. It consists of a central metadata repository called the Glue data catalog. We will cover this in depth and set up some databases and tables during this tutorial, but this is a key component that we will cover. And it also has a flexible scheduler. Again, we'll cover this in the tutorial. I'll show you how it works. It's not the only way to schedule things inside Glue, but it is certainly good to know that you don't have to leave the Glue environment to do this. On the right hand side we have this nice little diagram provided by AWS that kind of shows you what Glue does. And we're actually going to start down here because this is kind of the fundamentals and what people think when we say Glue. You have a data source, you can extract that data source, you can transform that through a script. This runs on the serverless ETL engine in Python or in Spark, and then you load a data target. It has numerous data sources. You can use numerous data targets. That's where the Glue data catalog comes in. You store references to your data source or your data target in the Glue data catalog, and then to populate the Glue data catalog you can use things like crawlers or the management console. We will do both in the tutorial, and then once you have things set up in the Glue data catalog, the scripts, the AWS Glue jobs, your ETL pipelines, you can use a schedule or event to run them, and again we'll cover that in the tutorial. So I always think this is useful to put in why use AWS Glue. I know for the purposes of this video we are just going to do the tutorial, but there are many different options for ETL in AWS, and as you learn these as a data engineer or an architect or as a developer, it's good to know when to use the correct tool for the correct job. And if you're doing this as part of the AWS data engineer certification, I'll also leave a link to that video in the description below. It's good to know this as well. So AWS Glue offers a fully managed serverless ETL tool. So again, fully serverless ETL tool. This removes the overhead and the barriers to entry when there is a requirement for the ETL service in AWS. And what that means is that you don't have to manage the underlying infrastructure. To use Spark, you need to spin up clustered compute in a highly parallelized environment. Using AWS Glue, you don't need to think about any of that. It just runs it for you on managed services in behind the scenes. So again, there is nothing for you to provision. It is serverless. AWS are doing the heavy lifting. You need to write the code and it will do the ETL. Okay, so what we'll do now is jump onto the console. We'll get hands-on with a little bit of setup work. I have wrote some CloudFormation scripts for this to help us set up permissions and some of the data repositories that we'll need throughout this tutorial. Follow along. Make sure you have already downloaded that GitHub. If not, I'll show you to do it again in the middle of the setup work, but download that GitHub. We will be using it throughout this tutorial. So throughout this course, as I referenced in the intro, we will be using this GitHub. For this section of setup, we'll be using the code located in the code file, which is located here in setup-code.yaml. And we'll also then, once it's completed successfully, be uploading the data from the data file. The easiest thing to do, as I mentioned, was just take a copy of this down into your local machine. So to do that, you can just go code and then download as zip and then unzip that file once it's downloaded and use the contents throughout. The instructions on what we're doing is also located here, but don't worry, I'm going to guide you step by step. That being said, we need to jump onto the AWS console. So please log in and you'll be greeted with the homepage. Hopefully you are familiar with the AWS console. If not, and this is your first time using the AWS console, don't worry, I'll point out things as we go along. So the first thing we're going to do is go to CloudFormation. This is where we can use our infrastructure as code to spin up the resources we need for the tutorial. The idea behind this is that I have created the template for us, and that means we won't have to do as much user manual intervention, clicking through the console and doing all the stuff in terms of permissions that you see in many other tutorials. So we want to go create stack, create new resources. We're going to upload a template. You want to choose file and you want to go to the unzipped version of the folder that you've just downloaded from the GitHub. I repeat, the unzipped version. Go to the code folder, and then the setup-code.yaml. You want to open that, then you want to go next. You need to give the stack a name, so this can be anything that you want. So I'm just going to call this Johnny-Chivers, can't spell my own name, Chivers-Glue course 2024. That'll do that. Next thing you need to do is give the bucket a name. So this is the S3 bucket for the course. Bear in mind, with AWS, every bucket has to be unique globally, so you will not be able to use the same name as me for the bucket. But I'm going to call mine AWS Glue course Johnny Chivers. Hopefully that is unique. You need, again, I'll repeat, you need a unique name. So if you don't have one, it will tell you. But let's carry on for now. Use your name. It might be the easiest thing with some random numbers or digits. Accept and acknowledge at the bottom. We're going to run this using the root permissions that I'm currently logged in with, and then hit submit. So that will take a few minutes to go off and running. You can hit the refresh icon here and see what the actual setup code is doing. The code itself, as I mentioned in the header of the code, so if you just go and have a look at the file, it's going to create a few things for us. One is an S3 bucket. Next one is an IAM role for Glue. We'll be using this throughout to actually have permissions to do anything. And then the last thing is an Athena working group, which isn't technically part of this course, but we may use it to look at some of the data, so it's good to have it around as well. This shouldn't take too long to complete. In fact, it's completed already, so that took about 30 seconds. Let's check that a few things are there as they should be. So if you go to outputs, you'll see that we have the S3 bucket created. So copy that name under value. So outputs, copy the value. Let's go to S3. So I'm going to go to S3. I have other buckets in this account. You might only have one bucket. Don't worry. Just paste it in. Make sure the bucket has been created. I should mention as well, I'm working in the Ireland region for this as well. So that is the bucket. If we go to IAM, click on IAM, click in, and we have the name of the IAM role that we're looking for called AWS Glue course. So in here, if we go to roles on the left hand side, search for the role, you can see that we have the role. If we load the role up, then we should have a policy attached to the role. That's great, we do. And inside that policy is all the good stuff that we have created during the setup process. So that's the setup in terms of running the template. The next thing we need to do is actually upload some data and create some folders inside the S3 bucket itself. So let's go back to that S3 bucket that we were just on, that we know was successfully created. Then search for the bucket that we were just on. So AWS Glue course Johnny Chivers was my bucket. If we go back on to the GitHub and we go back into the main part of the README file, you can see that we're going to upload the data. Ignore that for a little second. But what we need to do is create a few things in the folder structure denoted. So if we just copy 0.1 raw data, I'll show you how to do this. You want to go to create folder. You want to call this folder raw data, and then you just want to create the folder like so. Next, we have to do process data. So this will be quite quick again. Same process in create folder, paste it, and then create folder. Next, we have to do is script location. We'll be needing these folders throughout the tutorial, so we'll just have to create them once and then that's it done. Script location. Oh, I hit the wrong button, back in. Create folder. Folder name, script location, create folder. Temp directory, We'll also need a temp directory, create folder, folder name, temp directory, create folder. And then we will need a Athena folder called Athena. So we'll just go into create folder again. This is the last one and create Athena. Perfect. Back onto the GitHub, you'll see that in the raw data folder, we have to upload the structures and orders data, keeping the folder structure as denoted inside the GitHub. So you can see here we'll have a folder called raw data. Then we're going to upload our customers and orders folders that have CSV files inside them. This is quite simple. So what the easiest way to do this is to go to the actual raw data folder itself. Then what I find the next bit to do, the easiest way, is to go upload. Then when here, the easiest thing for me to do, or the way I find it easiest, is just put this folder down into the little minimize folder. Go get the location where you have unzipped, and again, unzipped that data. So for me, it's going to be in Jonathan in here. Then I've got sitting in here, in data. So that's just where I have these unzipped locations. So go find the customers and orders in the GitHub unzipped version. Click and drag it across. Again, that is just the easiest thing to do. You can see here then you get your customers folder, your orders folder, and your 2 CSVs as well. Click upload. This will take a few seconds. There's not that much data there, so just bear tight. Once it's been successfully done, you can close, and you can see that you have customers with a customer CSV, and you have orders with a order CSV. So we've successfully, I'm going to blow this back up big because we don't need it that way anymore, created this raw data folder with our customers folder and CSV, and our orders folder and our orders CSV as well. So that's the setup work complete for the tutorial. Make sure you follow along with this. It's pretty simple. Run the CloudFormation template, then create these folder locations in the S3 bucket that was created, and then upload the data maintaining the folder structure just as I have shown. The AWS Glue Data Catalog. So the AWS Glue Data Catalog is a persistent metastore. So let's say that again, is a persistent metastore. Well, what does that actually mean? Well, it stores metadata. So what is metadata? Well, on the right hand side, we have different descriptions of metadata. We have location, schema, data types, and data classification. So this is the important bit. It's a managed service that lets you store, annotate, and share metadata. Again, metadata, these are the things on the right hand side, which can be used to query and transform data. What I find, or what can be the difficult concept to get your head around, is that when you register things in the Glue Data Catalog, i.e. data sources or data targets, they do not move from their existing location. So if I have a database, let's say I have a database that's just a MySQL database and it's on AWS, and I have data in that database. When I register it with the Glue Data Catalog, it will store the location, the schema, the data types, and even the classification of that data in the Glue Data Catalog. What it does not do is move the data to AWS Glue. It keeps it inside that database. It stays where it is. This is just a pointer and information on how to access that data. And that's the key thing. It becomes a metastore, a collection of information that you can use to perform ETL on different data sources and bring them together inside AWS. And you need to remember then that there's one AWS Glue Data Catalog per AWS region. So you get one per region. You can use IAM, that's access, identity, and access management policies to control access to that. And you can also use data governance because you can annotate the Glue Data Catalog. So again, it's a Glue Data Catalog. It's where you store metadata. It does not store physical data. This is just reference information required to get to the data you have stored in AWS. AWS Glue Databases. So a database is a set of associated data catalog table definitions organized into a local group. So what I've done here in this little graphic is draw a database and then put some tables inside it. So this is where we name something and then associate the tables to it. The way you would do it normally in an RMDBS database, for example. We'll jump onto the console in just a second and we can look at actually setting up a database, and we'll do tables as well, but we'll actually look at how this works in action. Okay, back on the AWS console. If this is your first time, don't worry. What we're going to do is navigate to AWS Glue. So type in AWS Glue in the search bar and click AWS Glue. Once there, you'll notice a few different things looking around on the console. There's quite a lot going on. The left hand side is going to be your best friend, so I'm going to minimize that down in case you've arrived without it out. There's a hamburger menu to expand it, and then down the left you can see we have a getting started, ETL jobs, data catalog tables, data connections and workflows. Then it breaks down into two sections. One is data catalog, where you have databases and tables, and a couple of other things including crawlers, connections. Then on top of this, you have data integration and ETL. So ETL jobs, data classification modes. We'll be looking at some of this as the tutorial goes on. Importantly, there is legacy pages. So if you're familiar with Old Glue and its layout, these are the legacy pages down the left-hand side. Glue's done a lot of work in how it looks on the UI in the last kind of 2 years. If you look at my previous tutorial compared to this tutorial, it's a completely different look. That's why I've redone this video. But if you're looking for anything from the old tutorial or you haven't been on Glue in a few years, you can find your legacy pages down here. Okay, so what we're going to do next then is create a database for this tutorial for the purposes of the rest of the demonstration. You need to go to databases, which is on the left hand side, and we need to create a database for this. We need to add a database. So let's call this one raw_data. You can have a location for that. So let's get a location. Let's be proper about this. This isn't required, but is good practice if you can. S3, we need to go find that bucket again that I have just created for the Glue course. I'm going to leave this open in a tab because we'll be referencing it quite a lot. We want this raw data folder and we want to copy the URI, put it back in like this, and we can create the database itself. That's how we create a database. AWS Glue tables. So a Glue table is the metadata definition that represents your data. The data resides in its original store. So there it is again. I'm going to keep saying this. The data resides in its original store. This is just a representation of the schema. This, as I said, is the most difficult thing that people come to grasp with Glue. It is just a representation of the data. It's just pointing to where the data is. When I was at reInvent last year, a few people came up to me and said, "Hey Johnny, your videos are really useful because no one else kind of mentions how this actually works." And it's quite simple that there's connections, there's information stored in the Glue data catalog that represents your data wherever it is actually repository, wherever that repository actually resides, but it is not the data itself. So again, make sure you understand this, make sure you read this and understand this fully before you progress with AWS Glue. AWS Glue Crawlers. So it's a little program that AWS have created that lets you find information about data that you have stored in AWS or on databases, and then it populates or tries to populate the AWS Glue data catalog for you with information. And the idea behind this is that it lifts the burden of you having to manually create the tables that you have lying around or you have on AWS already. I will show you how to use both the AWS Glue Crawler and I will show you how to manually add the tables. So you don't have to use the crawler. It's just a handy little program that helps you or minimizes the burden on trying to find all the tables that you have. You point it to where the data resides and it comes up with the schemas. It comes up with the table names for you. But you do have the ability to manually create the tables as well. The choice is yours. I always use a blend of both. There is the right tool for the right job, and we'll show you how to do both in this tutorial. Okay, again, I just went back out to the AWS Glue console to make it simple to find the tables. So hamburger menu on the left-hand side, if it's not already expanded, and go to tables. That's as simple as that. I'm going to minimize this little header and banner here. For this part of the demo or the tutorial, what we're going to do is add a table manually. So looking down inside the GitHub, you can see that we have two tables. One is orders, one is customers. We'll do the customers because it has the smaller schema. I would never really add a table manually unless I'm just playing around with data. I would usually do it through code, but it's good to see this in action. So let's go back to tables and let's go add table at the top. First thing we need to do is give the table a name. So I'm going to call this customers. Actually, I'm going to keep it all smalls because that's just best practice. Customers. And this is raw data, so I'm just going to call it customers raw. Next thing we need to do is create or select a database. Well, we did that previously, so that's raw data. You give this a description. This is us. This is the customers data. That'll do. Right, we want to keep this table as it is, standard AWS Glue table as default. We're going to say it's an S3. We're going to say the data is in our account, and it's going to say, well, where's the data? So we'll go browse. We'll go find that bucket that we created through the CloudFormation template. We're going to go raw, and it's in here inside our customers. We're going to choose. Just click off that in order to get rid of the warning. We are in CSV data, common deliberated, and go next. It's going to then ask us a few questions about the schema itself. So we're going to add the schema, doing it here. So we'll just go add. Column number 1. Well, if we go back onto the GitHub, we know it's customer ID. So we're just going to copy. And we are going to go back in and say it's customer ID. It's not a string type, it is an int type. So we'll just go int and hit save. Then we'll want to add the next column. Well, we know that it's first name, so we're just going to go first name, back in and paste. Again, I'm going to keep these as small, so just take out that capital F. And we didn't do it for the customer ID, which isn't great. So back in there, take that C down and make it a small. Then we need last name, and we just copy that in, and we add a column in as it stands. Make sure that's number 3, and that is last name, and save. And then we have full name as the last one, so full name, save. So that's the columns added. We have 1 int and 3 strings. Then we want to go next, and you can see here it has asked us about the table. We have it in raw data, the customer data name, and it is in CSV. Then we want to go next, and again, if you needed to re-edit the schema, just click that edit schema function. Then you want to go next, then you want to go create, and it's off, and it is creating the table for us. Let's go and add the second table, the orders table, through a crawler. So let's go down to the left hand side here and go to crawlers. Again, if this hamburger or this menu's disappeared, hit the hamburger, go to crawlers, and then we're going to create a crawler. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to call this AWS Glue tutorial for the crawler, like this, and we're just going to hit next. We haven't mapped the data already, naturally. Then we're going to go add data source. We have an S3 data source. It's in this account. We're going to go browse. We're going to find that bucket again that we've been using for this course. It's in raw data. It is the orders table that we're going to map this time. Again, that might go red, so just click off it. Crawl all subfolders. Yep, that's correct. And then we want to go add S3 source. Then when we've got that, we want to highlight that source and go next. An existing IAM role. So as part of this tutorial, we created an IAM role. If you need to know the name of that IAM role, it's in the setup code, and then you just go down to the role and it says AWS Glue course. That's the one we're looking for, the one we checked existed after we ran the template. Back in here, and then just paste it in and find it. Click off, and that will be you. We don't need lake formation. Do not check that box. Our target database is raw data. We don't need a prefix on the table name for now. That's fine. And then we're just going to schedule on demand. Click next. Hit create crawler. This will take a little second. And then you want to run the crawler by clicking this button. This will go off and run itself to map the data for this. This will probably take 1 or 2 minutes in total, so I'll pause the video here and we can pick it up once it is done and has created our orders table for us. Okay, after exactly 1 minute for me, so I did say it would take between 1 and 2, you can see that it's completed successfully and we've had 1 table change. You can click here to see what that is. We've added the table orders. Perfect. Well, that's great because that's what we were looking for. If we then go into our databases, if we go into raw data, you can see we have customers raw, and then we also have orders raw as a table, or orders as our table. Because we added this by a crawler and I didn't put a prefix or suffix in, it's used the folder's name. That's completely fine. We're allowed to have the name that we want, but more importantly, let's just check that it picked this up correctly. So if we click on that link, it should take us into the orders and we should see the CSV. Perfect. Let's click on the orders table itself. Did it get all the different columns? It's got 16 columns in total. So if we go back here and we go to data, you can see that we start with sales order ID and we finish with line total. So let's do that little visual check to make sure that those things line up. Yep, sales order ID, and we finish with line total. So we've managed to pick up the entire schema through a program called a crawler that AWS has wrote. That has stopped us having to manually enter this information or enter it through code, such the way that I did the manual setup for the customers table. So it's took that burden off us if you have a lot of data and you just want a way to look at the tables and get them loaded very, very quickly. So that's a crawler. Let's move on to the next section. A brief word on partitions in AWS. This is important to know. Our ETL job, when we get there, will create a single partition in AWS, but you can play around and create more. So a partition is folders where data is stored in S3, which are physical entities, are mapped to partition, which are logical entities. Columns in the Glue table. What does that actually mean? Okay, so we can have a table called sales, and we can have a sale date. And AWS Glue, or indeed big data processing frameworks in general, give you the ability to create partitions. And with these partitions, we can split things into year, month, and day for that sales date. And what these actually become are logical folders, or physical folders on S3. So we can actually split the data on S3. So rather than having just a column in the table, you have a folder. And what this means is when you search for something, like I want to find the sales date, that is February the 2nd, 2019, the inner workings of AWS Glue know that actually it can exclude the folders that don't have that on it. So it knows actually, because these days aren't correct, I can just go look at this one here out of the 4. It's a way to speed up queries. It's a way to speed up writing as well, and updates depending exactly on what you're doing. You need to understand partitions to use AWS Glue. Again, we will create a partition. I will show you how to do that when it comes to the ETL job. If you're not quite physically grasping that now, hopefully by the time we do the ETL job, it will all sink in. AWS Glue Connections. So AWS Glue Connections is a data catalog object that contains the properties that are required to connect to a particular data store. Typical of many cloud providers or any ETL tool, you can store connections. So if you have a database, wherever that may live, on-premise or in AWS, you can store the connection string, the password, and the username inside AWS Glue. That means when you need to actually reference it in an ETL script, you're actually just entering the object information. You don't store the passwords or anything in the script. Pretty standard practice these days. When it was built with AWS Glue, it wasn't. You would expect it to be there. It is there. Please use AWS Glue Connections when you need them. So let's take a little look at connections. Down the left hand side, you'll see there is connections. Click on connection. In connectors, you can go to the marketplace, or if you knew your connector already exists, you can go create connection, and you can see here a list of connectors that you can use with AWS Glue. These include AWS connectors or second party or first party connectors as well, such as Salesforce, Snowflake. There's SAP sitting around as well. On to the fun bit, AWS Glue ETL. So AWS Glue ETL supports extracting data from various sources, and that's important. So various sources, there is the likes of S3, RDS, on-premise databases, transforming it to meet your business needs, and then loading it into a destination of your choice. We will be doing this in the tutorial. I will show you how to do this visually. You will not need to code. I will show you the script as well. But if you're not a good coder or you can't code, don't worry. You'll be able to follow along with the tutorial. AWS Glue ETL engine, you need to know this, is an Apache Spark engine distributed for big data workloads across worker nodes. It also supports Python, but more typically you would use the Spark engine. You need to understand this as well, that the AWS Glue DPUs, one DPU is equivalent to 4 CPUs and 16 gig of memory. When you're provisioning jobs, and when we jump into the ETL job in just a little second, you will see that I provisioned 2 DPUs for that job. This means that I will have 8 CPUs and 32 gigabits of memory available. If you do not have enough DPUs for your job, it will crash and fail. If you have too many DPUs for your job, you're paying for compute resource you're not using. It is a bit of an art to tune your Glue jobs. There are handy features on the console to show you when you're under provisioning and over provisioning DPUs. This is the charging mechanism. So depending on the region you're in, it will be priced at how many DPUs per minute that you use is the cost that you pay. So it's important to size these correctly. And just before we jump on and create an ETL job, it's good to know about these. We won't use them, but you can put bookmarks in, which basically means when you have new data arrive, the ETL job that you're creating will not reprocess the old data, so you're just doing a delta load of the data. Really handy if you're getting like hourly loads or daily loads into an S3 bucket and you just want to process the new data. This means AWS Glue is automatically tracking that for you and says, hey, I'm not going to process the previous run of data. I'm just going to process the new data that has landed. It bookmarks it and will not reprocess it again. Okay, so back on the console, the first thing we're going to do is create a database so we can actually store new tables we create during this visual ETL process. So on the left-hand side, you want to go databases and you want to go add database. And we're going to call this database processed underscore data. Two C's there when it shouldn't be. Processed underscore data. We need the S3 location that we already set up when we were running the setup script. So if we go in and we find that bucket again, I've minimized the tabs there in between different parts of the lesson. I have a processed data area of the bucket. I want to hit the tick and take the URI. Again, URI, not URL. That's really important. And we want to paste that down here. And we need to enter a little bit of a description. So I'm just going to say this is the database, database to hold the tables for processed data. Processed data. And then you want to create that database. So that gives us a location to store some of the processed data. Now down the left hand side you can see there is a data integration and ETL section. There's lots of different things here, but we're going to be working on the ETL jobs, and for the purposes of this tutorial we're going to do visual ETL. That means if you can't code or you don't want to code, you don't need to know it for the purposes of this demo. Click on that visual ETL and then hit create job from a blank graph. This is your UI or your GUI that helps you build Glue jobs using nodes rather than coding. Don't worry, it still creates a code script under the script tab in behind, so you can actually see what it's doing. But for the purposes of this, we'll do visual ETL. First thing you need to do is give it a name. So let's call this processed customers job. And let's hit enter. You'll see then when this goes completely red here, we do have a few things we need to fill in. So IAM rule, I've created one during the setup course, or script rather, for us called AWS Glue course, so select that. Scrolling down into advanced properties, we will have to pick a name or a few locations that will be named to store different aspects here. So the first thing is we have an area in the bucket to store the scripts. So again, if we go into the bucket itself, I have created a script location. So choose that. You also need a place to put your logs. So again, let's view that. Oh no, not view that, sorry, let's browse that. Then go find the bucket again. So mine is AWS Johnny Chivers course. Inside the temp directory would be fantastic, and choose that. And then we'll just put /logs. And then scrolling down inside temporary path, let's browse that again. Go find that S3 bucket. I've given all the permissions required to access this bucket during the script setup, so you won't have to add anything extra by using those locations. Then we want the temporary directory and choose that directory. That's everything there under advanced settings, so we can just scroll back up and minimize that. And then to keep the cost down, the DPUs, the number of workers we want is 2. That's perfect. Everything else can be left as it is. You can give it a description if you want. I'm not going to bother. And then hit save on the top right. So that's the job saved, and you'll see that there's no red warnings anymore. This plus icon is where you can add your nodes, and the first thing we need is a source, and our source is going to be the AWS Glue Data Catalog. We're going to get that customers table that we have already set up using raw data, and then we will have under tables, customers raw. Select that. You'll see here that there's a data preview section ready to go. Depending on whether you've been into ETL or not, this can take up to 2 or 3 minutes to start. You'll see data preview processing, and then eventually you will get here to the point that your data preview is ready. So you can actually see the data as it currently sits, and you have the output schema as well. For this data, what we're going to do is take it and we're going to store it as Parquet format in S3, registering a new table in the Glue Data Catalog. What we're also going to do is add a transformation to the table, and in this case, we're going to add a process time. So inside nodes and go to transformation, there are lots and lots of different transformations that you can do with a node. In this one, we're going to add a current timestamp as our processed date timestamp. So click that node and it will automatically join up. If it does not automatically join, it will look like this on your canvas as it currently sits. You just want to click on and then choose the parent node and select the AWS Glue Data Catalog, and you can see there that it's ready to go. You need to give this then an output column, so I'm just going to call this processed timestamp, keep things nice and simple, and we'll just leave it as default. So you can see here then with the output schema, it's picking up the new addition that we have as processed timestamp. Then we need a target, so into target, and we're going to use S3 as our target. So perfect, we've selected S3 as our target. You can see here it's already got the format Parquet selected. We're going to do snappy. We do need to pick a location to save this in S3. So again, let's go into that bucket that we've created for the purposes of this course. Inside that process data, select the process data. I do that all the time. Hit choose. And then we want to call this customers underscore processed. And then we want a / on the end of that as well. So that's the location we're going to save the data to. We do want to create a new table in the data catalog, and on subsequent runs update the schema to add new partitions. That's exactly what we want to do. Our database is going to be processed data processed data for the database. We have to give the table a name, so let's just call this then customers underscore process. So that's the name of the table we're going to create. And then we want to add a partition key as well, and our partition key will be on the processed date timestamp. Then we want to save everything that we've just done, and that is our ETL job. We're going to take that data, we're going to add a timestamp, we're going to transform it into Parquet, we're going to save it to S3, we're then going to create a Glue Data Catalog table called customers processed. That's going to sit in the process data database, and also we're going to create a partition key called date timestamp. Okay, perfect. So let's run this and let's save this. Then when you're actually ready to run, you can go to runs here or you can click run there, whatever one you want to do. Then let's run job. That'll kick off the job. It has to spin up a few containers and a few other things in behind the scenes. This might take a few minutes to process in total because it's the first go. You just want to hit that refresh to see what's happening. You can also see down here what's going on with the job itself. You can see the input arguments and everything else on the UI. I'm going to pause this here and let it do its thing, and then once it's processed successfully, we'll pick it back up. You can see it's off and running 16 seconds in already. Okay, you can see after 1 minute, 4 seconds precisely, it's succeeded. So that's fantastic. Let's go have a look at the Glue Data Catalog. So if we go into databases, we're going through process data, you'll see that we actually have some table data there. We can click on the table and we can see that we have our partition, our full name, our custom ID and last name. If we click on partitions, we should be able to see that we have a partition for when I just ran that. And also, if we go back into the schema, we should also be able to go to location by clicking this URL here. That'll take us in. That is where our data is currently sitting as a Parquet file. Excellent. As part of this demo as well, I also set up Athena so we could look at data. So if you notice, there will be a working group selected for Athena. So inside Athena, if you go there, you'll see that there's a working group called AWS Glue Course Athena Workgroup. So you want to select that on the top right. So once you've selected that working group, that's the location to save our Athena results. You can have a look at the data as well by going to process data. Then we should, under tables, have our table. And the simplest way is just to click those 3 dots there and go preview table. This will query our data table and bring us back the data in Parquet format. You can see there that the process timestamp is also there for us. That's how you do it with the process data for customers. You can do exactly the same with the order data, and you would do the same thing again where you go in and you start with an ETL job and you would say visual ETL and start creating the same thing, except this time with the Glue Data Catalog, you would select it and you would have raw data and your table this time, raw data, and the table this time would be orders. So you can do the same thing with orders as you did before with customers. I won't do it for the purposes of this demo. That's a bit of a take-home one for you, but going ahead, do exactly the same thing for the orders data, and you will be off and running creating your second ETL job. AWS Glue Data Quality is a relatively new feature. In fact, it was marked with new when I'm filming this video, so you will see it marked with new when we're on the console. This helps you monitor the quality of your data by data quality definition language using a open source project called DQ. We can actually go into the console in a little second. You'll see it in action. It will formulate some rules for us, show us this DQDL language in operation, and then we can alter that language as well or remove rules to suit our data quality. This is so when we're using Glue, we can perform data quality checks on data that's coming in or data that we actually create through ETL and then apply that governance through code. Let's get started and have a little look in the console of how AWS Glue Data Quality works. We are going to take a quick look at Glue Data Quality. It's a new feature and it's located in the Glue Data Catalog, and you want to go to tables. So let's pick a table. Let's pick the orders table. It's kind of the most detailed, so hopefully we'll get something. And you can see up here they've got data quality new. It's actually still under new, and it has a video. So watch the video if you want. But what we want to do is actually get some data quality rules for this table. So if we go run history, we'll see that there's probably nothing on this table whatsoever. Is there any recommendation runs? No, we haven't. Right. So we want to go recommended rules. And we want to click recommended rules. Oh, choose the IAM rule. We've got one for it. So this is where Glue is going to go off and create rules for us that it recommends. That's it off and running. So this is using a bit of AI, a bit of machine learning, looking at our data and coming up with the rules for us. So I'll pause the video. This will probably take a few minutes and then we'll see some of the rules, hopefully, that Glue decides should be applied to our order table in terms of data quality. Okay, and after a few minutes, you can see that it has a successful run. If you click into the run, you will see the recommended rules that it has created or recommended for this data set. You can copy these rules, and then what you want to do is go back into the tab before. You want to go to the rules themselves by clicking these, and then you want to hit copy. Then we want to go back out to the table. I'm sure there's a quicker way to do this than what I'm doing. We want to Glue Data Quality. You want to scroll down and you'll see that you have the create data quality rules. You click in and then you can just paste in what we lifted there. So I'm just going to go Control V, and you want to get rid of that, and you want to get rid of that one at the bottom, and then you can start to mess around with this. So you can see that your row count per loaded things should be between these two. You can adjust that if you wanted. It says make sure that everything has a sales order in it. Looking at the standard deviation, this and this. Again, let's just say we wanted this to be bigger or smaller, so we could just go 100. And we know that our maximum is going to be 10,000. You could go 10,000. And this is how you can start to build up those rule sets. You save the rule set. You give the rule set a name. So I'm just going to call this DQ_1. And then it will apply this rule set to the data in the table. It will then start to alert you when these rules are broken. Again, you can see that like column values, you can add all the values into the columns. And using this library, you can start to build those rules to ensure the data quality of your data. AWS Glue scheduling. We will take a look at this in just a second, but you need to know about AWS triggers. This is how you initiate an ETL job or actually a crawler job. I'll show you both on the console. And then this can be defined on a schedule, a time, or event. It's up to you. It can be done on demand as well. We'll see the options, but a trigger, i.e. to trigger something, is how we start the workflows or how we start an ETL job. And then we have AWS Glue workflows. This lets us create complex extract, transform, and load activities. So we can run a crawler, we can run our ETL script, then we can run another ETL script. When we're on the console right now, I will show you how to create a trigger. I will show you how to create a workflow. These are really useful if you're only using AWS Glue. If you need to use other things outside of Glue, like EMR or Athena, then you'll have to think of something else like managed workflows for Apache Airflow. That's what I commonly use. But if you're only in the AWS Glue environment and you only need those tool set, then AWS Glue Workflows is totally a viable tool for scheduling ETL jobs. Just a brief mention, now we've came out of workflows, and I know I've keep mentioning it. Apache Airflow is one that you can use. Step functions is one you can use, and Event Bridge. These are 3 very common patterns I see for scheduling Glue jobs. Bear them in mind, but workflows works perfectly well if you are only doing things inside AWS Glue. Okay, let's look at orchestration within the Glue console. If you're just using Glue, this is fantastic for orchestration. So if you're just running Glue jobs, the catalog, doing crawlers, cool. This is a place for you to come do some orchestration. If you're knitting other AWS services together, my recommendation is to go look at other orchestration, particularly when it comes to the managed workflows for Airflow. That's my go-to at the moment when I'm integrating EMR, Athena, Glue all together. But if you're just using AWS Glue, this is a great tool. So go into workflows and you want to go to add a workflow. I'm just going to call this test workflow and create the workflow itself. You can click into the workflow and then we need to start adding things that are done. When I hit add trigger, you can see that we don't currently have any triggers. So we can create triggers from the triggers page if you want. So if you hit add trigger, we can say that this trigger can be crawler, Glue tutorial. Then we're just going to do it on demand. We're going to hit next. It's going to ask you what our target resource is. So we'll hit resource type. We'll hit crawler. Select the crawler, AWS Glue tutorial, and hit add. Go next and then hit create. So there's a crawler. Then we want to go back into our workflow. We can click on our workflow. We can hit add trigger. We should have our crawler sitting there to run on demand, and we'll hit add. And you can see here that we've added the trigger to the workflow. If you just go then, if we just look at this and hit run workflow, it will start to run the workflow. That workflow is going to go and crawl our data. We can then build dependencies across here. So we could put in the next node to be actually run the AWS job once the crawler completes, and you can start to build more complicated workflows. To do that, you would click on the crawler like this, add a trigger, add a new one. So give this a name. So let's just call this Glue Job ETL. This is an event. Start after the event and hit add. Then we would want to go in, select the crawler or select the job that we want to start. So in this case, it would be the process job, and hit add. And then you can start to build out those different things as you go. So now, once the crawler's run, we're going to do the job. And again, you can actually hit run workflow for that to go and kick off as well. And if you had many jobs or many crawlers, you could start to build a more complex workflow for scheduling. As I said, this is just a little taster of what you can do with it. If you're working within Glue only, totally valid to use this as your orchestrator. AWS Glue DataBrew. I leave this in because I covered it last time. You'll notice when I jump onto the console, it actually now sits separately away from AWS Glue. It's its own service. This is for visual data preparation that makes it easier for non-coders, data analysts, or someone who just wants to quickly look at data in, quite frankly, what looks like an Excel workbook to clean and normalize data. I am always hesitant to put this into production. I'm hesitant for data engineers to use it. I use it to look at data quickly and manipulate it before I go write some data engineering code and put it through more concrete CI/CD type processes for DevOps. But it is a good tool or an army switchblade to have in your arsenal when you need to look at data or you want to give the option for people to look at data that can't code. Let's look at this in action. I will use the sample data to help us see how this works when we jump onto the AWS console now. Interestingly, with the new AWS console, they've actually moved Glue DataBrew out of it. So you actually have to type in AWS Glue DataBrew. So Glue Data usually does it, and it comes up as a completely separate service page. So it's took this out. There's a video again about how it works, so feel free to watch that. So we want to create a sample project. We're going to do UN resolution votes. You want to select create a new IAM role. We'll call this one just AWS course Glue, and then it'll add the rest of it. That means we can delete it once we're done. So then you want to hit create project. This will run off in the background, create that IAM role for you, load up the data into the DataBrew UI for us, and we can start to play around with it. If you haven't been here before, it does look a little bit like Excel or Smartsheets, and that's really the idea. It's an area for non-data engineers maybe, or like data engineers that want to get to grips with data quickly, but don't want to do it through code. Yeah, I would generally use it if I wanted to look at something quickly. I would let non-technical users use it as well. I'm always just a little bit apprehensive about going to like create the job out of it and letting them run glue code. If there's a valid business reason, sure, but what we don't want is getting away from the best practices of CI/CD and maintaining those DevOps pipelines when it comes to our data engineering best practice. But again, there's nothing wrong with it, provided that it's done in a safe and agile and secure way. You can see that this is loading up 51%. I'm just going to pause the video until it is done. Okay, so after a few minutes, you can see that it loads up the rows and starts to give a look at what we have. You can see at the top of each one, it tells you information like the number of distinct values, the kind of range that's in there, and the percentages of each other of the values. And it's kind of using, it is using AI, ML in behind the scenes to populate a lot of this data. You can look at the schema as well by clicking schema, and it'll tell you all the different columns that you have. And you can get a profile of the data if you wanted on top of it. But I'm just going to go back to grid view. If you were interested, then you can start to filter, sort the columns, format the columns, add in things as well. So let's just do a quick filter. You want to add in a filter and you want to do it by condition. And then you want to do where it contains. And then you can select the source column. So let's just say ours is resolution. And we want to make sure that the column contains, and a value of, let's say we only wanted 66. Oh, that's 55, 66. You apply that and it will apply to the column that value or that condition, and you can see it's off running. And if it has 66 in it, it's going to keep that. And that's how it does. It stores this as a recipe. So you can see here, that's the first step. You can then add another step. So let's say we wanted to, I'm just going to dedupe. We want to remove duplicate values in columns. You can say, well, what columns? Let's say we wanted to dedupe the first column, which is assembly session, all rows, and apply. So it's going to dedupe the columns here based on that ID. It's going to select the first one it sees, brings it down to lesser columns or a less number of columns. It's deduped. And you can see here then that you have your recipe. You can publish that recipe, or alternatively, you can import a new one or download it. And then once you have this recipe once, you can apply it to data sets over and over again. Best thing to do is sit and play around with these different functions if you're interested. Again, for me, as I said, Glue DataBrew, really get to grips with it for users that don't code, don't write the code. I kind of give it to my non-technical users when it makes sense. I use it to look at data really quickly. I'm always just a little bit apprehensive about anyone putting it into a production pipeline for data engineering. Sure, business users who want to play around with data, create jobs out of data that are bigger data sets and use it in their day-to-day business, cool. Those refined CI/CD pipelines with DevOps processes, I'm not such a fan of using Glue DataBrew for those purposes. Okay, folks, that concludes the tutorial on AWS Glue. We've kind of took a look at what AWS Glue is. We spent some time looking at the AWS Glue data catalog. We then created ETL jobs. We've learned how to schedule those ETL jobs. And we've also looked at Glue data quality and Glue DataBrew as well. One final reminder, really like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out. In the description below, I've also left a link to the exams for the AWS Data Engineering Certification if you're interested in taking that. There's also a YouTube tutorial on this channel for that certification. And until next time, folks, thanks for watching.